Get him out of here! Now! The furious shout cracked through the Grand Meridian ballroom like a whip, slicing cleanly through the chatter of senators, bankers, and Fortune 500 executives. For a moment, the room froze. Forks halted midair, champagne paused at lips, conversation suspended like crystal ornaments on the brink of shattering. And all eyes turned toward the towering archway where the commotion had begun. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Hero Tales by Jacob so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. Under the glow of chandeliers the size of satellite dishes, a man stood alone, thin, worn down, and as out of place as a storm cloud drifting across a flawless summer sky. His name, though no one knew it yet, was Aaron Blake. His coat, an old military field jacket faded into the color of dust and memory, hung loosely against his frame. His boots left small gray footprints along the immaculate marble like an accusation stamped onto the floor. Nothing about him belonged in that shimmering world of privilege. He did not flinch beneath their stares. Instead, he lifted his chin slightly, as if bracing himself against a wind only he could feel. And when he spoke, his voice rasped out, dry, fragile, yet carrying a strange steadiness that hushed even the whispers that had begun slithering through the crowd. "Please," he said, "I'm only asking if I can play for a meal." The ballroom reacted as if he had told a joke. A few snorts erupted, then a smattering of laughter, then the kind of full-throated amusement that people used when they wanted to prove they were not threatened, not moved, not touched in the slightest. It rolled over him like cold water, but still he stood. Up front, closest to the stage where a magnificent ebony Steinway grand piano gleamed beneath golden lights, sat Bradley Whitmore, the man who had shouted. Wealthy, powerful, and so accustomed to obedience that defiance of any kind was nearly unthinkable. His tuxedo fit him like armor, his expression twisted into a sneer of pure disdain, sharp enough to cut glass. "How'd you get in here?" he demanded, rising from his seat. "This is a private gala. We don't let just anyone wander in off the street." Aaron didn't answer right away. His pale, tired eyes traveled across the room, absorbing every face, every gleaming table, every contemptuous smirk. He had seen war zones quieter than this ballroom, yet the hostility here felt more personal, more precise. A different kind of battlefield. One built not from rubble and smoke, but from polished floors and cold indifference. "I don't want charity," he said softly. "Just a hot meal. I saw the piano. I can play." The laughter intensified, sharp, condescending, almost gleeful. Someone muttered something about the homeless trying new tricks. Another whispered that he'd probably damaged the keys. The words swirled together, each one an echo of dismissal that tightened the air until it felt suffocating. By the kitchen doors, a young server, Lily Dawson, a college sophomore working 2 jobs to keep from drowning in debt, watched the scene unfold. Her hand trembled slightly around the glass she was holding. Something about the old man's eyes unsettled her, tugged at a memory of her uncle, who had once returned from deployment with a 1,000-yard stare and hands that shook when the world grew too loud. She took a single step toward Aaron, but the hotel manager, Mr. Carlson, grabbed her elbow sharply. "Don't you dare," he hissed. "If you make a scene in front of these donors, I swear you'll be out of a job before sunrise." Lily swallowed hard and froze. Still, her eyes stayed on Aaron, wide, conflicted, apologetic. Meanwhile, the room bristled with rising hostility. 2 security guards began advancing, moving with the deliberate heaviness of men accustomed to forcing compliance. The guests leaned back in their seats, eager spectators preparing to witness the removal of an inconvenience. Yet Aaron did not retreat. He lifted his hand, steady, almost commanding, and the guards involuntarily paused. The moment hung in the air, charged and unexpected. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the entire room inhaled at once. "Just one song," he murmured, "in exchange for dinner. That's all." Bradley scoffed loudly. "A song? You think this is some kind of talent show?" His lips curled into a cruel smile. "Fine. You want to embarrass yourself? Let's make it interesting." The crowd stirred. The scent of roasted pheasant and expensive wine mingled with ugly anticipation, the kind found in places where humiliation was treated as entertainment. Bradley stepped closer, reveling in the attention. "You can play one song," he announced, "and it's a big if, you manage to get through it without sounding like a busted engine, I'll buy you dinner. The best one on the menu. Laughter rippled outward again. But, he added, lifting a finger, if you fail, and trust me, you will, you're escorted out. Not politely. And you don't come back through these doors again. Aaron's gaze drifted to the piano. His face remained unreadable, though something faint flickered in his expression, something old, something patient. He nodded. That simple gesture silenced the room more effectively than any outburst could have. And as he took his first step toward the Steinway, Lily felt her breath hitch, though she couldn't explain why. Something was shifting. Like the moments before a storm, when the air grows heavy and the world seems to hold its breath. No one knew it yet. But this night, this cruel, glittering night, was about to unravel. And nothing in the Grand Meridian Ballroom would ever be the same again. A hush rippled across the Grand Meridian Ballroom as Aaron Blake approached the Steinway. It wasn't respect that silenced them, nothing so noble. It was curiosity sharpened into a cruel, waiting hunger. The kind of hush a crowd gives when they expect a spectacle, when they know someone is walking toward their own humiliation and they don't want to miss a single second of it. Aaron walked slowly, his steps deliberate, almost weary. The limp in his gait became more noticeable under the bright stage lights, though he tried to mask it. His boots, those battered, dust-colored boots, made the faintest scuffing sound with each step, leaving dull prints on the pristine marble floor. But no one looked away. Even those pretending disinterest found their eyes drawn back to him again and again, compelled by something unspoken. Bradley Whitmore strolled behind him with the swagger of a man who believed he had already won. He pulled up a velvet-backed chair and planted himself just a few feet from the piano, as if preparing to preside over the spectacle. His smirk never wavered. "This should be entertaining," he murmured loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Aaron didn't respond. He reached the piano bench and paused, his hand hovering over the polished wood. His fingers twitched once, just once, before he slowly settled onto the bench. The Steinway sat beneath him like a silent judge. Its ebony surface reflected the ballroom lights in soft, trembling halos. It was the kind of instrument reserved for world-class performers, a piano whose sound could fill an entire concert hall without amplification. A single note could cost more than the clothes on Aaron's back. Carlson, the hotel manager, wrung his hands at the edge of the stage. "Careful with that," he whispered sharply, as if the piano might shatter from simply being touched by someone unworthy. "That instrument is worth a fortune, we know," Lily muttered under her breath from the kitchen entrance, though no one heard her. Aaron exhaled slowly. His shoulders rose and fell with a tension that felt centuries old. With quiet precision, he lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys. Ivory and jet, gleaming like untouched snow. The ballroom leaned in. "Go on, old man," Bradley prodded. "We haven't got all night." Aaron placed his hands on the keys, and then he did nothing. Seconds passed, long, thin strands of time that stretched into the soft, anxious quiet of the room. Some guests shifted in irritation. Others leaned farther forward. Bradley's smirk faltered. "You forget how to play already?" he taunted. Aaron's eyes were closed. His breathing had changed, deeper, steadier. He looked almost composed. As if his spirit had slipped somewhere far away, someplace no one in the ballroom could follow. His fingers rested on the keys like a man greeting an old friend after a long separation. Then he pressed a single note, middle C. The sound floated outward with an impossible clarity, pure, vibrant, a tone so delicate and so exquisitely controlled that the room seemed to inhale it. It hung in the air like a drop of silver. It was not the note of a man fumbling for technique or guessing at keys. It was the note of someone who knew the piano, intimately, instinctively, deeply. Several guests blinked. A man near the front frowned, confused. Bradley leaned forward, his smile tightening at the edges. "It's just one note," he muttered. "Beginner's luck." But his voice lacked certainty. Before anyone could speak, Aaron played again, one note, then another, then a third. A fragile melody began to take shape, delicate and haunting. It was not a piece they recognized. Not Beethoven, not Chopin, not any classical standard these donors like to reference to sound cultured during cocktail hours. This melody felt older, rawer, like something born on a lonely porch in the middle of nowhere, or scribbled by lamplight during a sleepless night in a war camp. A tune shaped by dirt beneath fingernails and memories heavy enough to bend bones. Lily felt her chest tighten. Her breath caught. Because it wasn't only music. It was a story, told in notes instead of words. Aaron's fingers drifted lightly, reverently, across the keys as though tracing the outline of a memory. The melody deepened, soft chords blooming under the surface like buried grief coming up for air. The room, so full of brittle laughter moments ago, had fallen into an unnatural quiet. Somewhere near the back, a fork slipped from a man's hand and clattered onto china. No one turned. No one breathed. What is that?" a woman whispered, her voice barely audible. Bradley's jaw tightened. He pushed himself forward in his chair, suddenly uneasy. "It's nothing," he said, "a trick. A cheap trick." But even he didn't believe it, because the notes were too precise, too honest, too painfully human. Aaron's left hand joined in now, adding depth, a sorrowful echo beneath the fragile upper melody. His shoulders relaxed, his spine straightened. And the room watched in stunned disbelief as the man they had mocked for being worthless transformed before their eyes. He was no longer the ghost shuffling at the back of the ballroom. He looked like someone who had once belonged on a different stage entirely, a world of spotlights, stages, and applause. Then, just as the guests began to absorb that possibility, Aaron allowed the music to swell. His fingers moved faster, bolder. A cascade of notes unfurled, as fluid as water and as sharp as glass. His hands no longer trembled. They flew. For a handful of breathtaking seconds, he let the full force of his ability burst forth. A collective gasp erupted across the ballroom. Because this was not the playing of a man who might know a tune or two. This was mastery. It was the kind of skill that required a lifetime of discipline and practice. A soul with the capacity to feel deeply enough to translate emotion into sound. It was artistry. And it terrified Bradley Whitmore. He rose abruptly from his chair, face flushing. He must have memorized it, he stammered. Anyone can learn a simple melody. But even as he spoke, Aaron shifted seamlessly into a second passage. Intricate, layered, heartbreakingly complex. The kind of phrasing no amateur could imitate, no matter how long they practiced. The room was spellbound. The music dipped into a soft, trembling whisper, like the last words of a friend before parting. Then it swelled again, rich and full and unbearably tender. Aaron poured himself into each note, each chord, giving the room something more valuable than spectacle. He gave them truth. Lily felt tears prick her eyes. She wasn't sure why. The melody touched something tender inside her, something she had been trying to ignore for months, the loneliness of being overworked and invisible, the fear of not being enough, the aching memory of her uncle's distant gaze the day he returned from deployment. Others felt it too. A man near the front wiped at his eyes discreetly. A woman clasped a hand over her mouth, her face crumpling. A younger guest stared at the floor, his throat working as though holding back something sharp. But Aaron didn't look at them. He didn't look at anyone. He played as if he were somewhere else, some cold night years ago, sitting at a broken piano in a military outpost, trying to keep his hands steady while the world outside burned. He played like a man who had lost many things, and for whom music was the only thing left that still made sense. The final notes drifted into silence, and the silence that followed was not the silence of judgment. It was the silence of revelation. The ballroom was utterly still, utterly changed. Lily's breath escaped her in a quiet, trembling sigh. Bradley's face had drained of color, and Aaron Blake, thin, weathered, forgotten by the world, lifted his hands slowly from the keys. He did not bow. He did not smile. He simply sat there, waiting. He knew what came next. The real test had only just begun. The silence after Aaron's final note stretched on so long it felt as if the entire ballroom had forgotten how to breathe. The last echo of the melody seemed to linger in the air, clinging to the chandeliers, settling into the folds of silk gowns and tailored suits. It wasn't the kind of silence that followed failure. It was the kind that followed a revelation. A quiet so heavy, so absolute, that no one dared disturb it. Aaron kept his gaze lowered, hands resting lightly on his knees. His posture was humble, almost small, but there was something unmistakably steady in the way he held himself now. Something that hadn't been visible when he shuffled into the ballroom minutes earlier. His breathing was calm, even. He looked like a man who had simply told the truth and was waiting for others to understand it. And they did. Or rather, they were beginning to. A woman near the front finally exhaled in a shaky rush. Another wiped a tear from her cheek, perhaps embarrassed to find herself moved by someone she had been ready to dismiss as a nuisance. A young man in a crisp gray suit dropped his gaze to the floor, suddenly unable to meet anyone's eyes, as if ashamed of his earlier laughter. Lily stood frozen at the kitchen entrance, her hands pressed tightly together. She felt a wetness on her face, and only realized after a moment that she had been crying. But not out of pity. No, this was something deeper, something that struck at a wound she had been trying to ignore for months. Aaron's music had reached a place inside her that words never could. Bradley Whitmore, meanwhile, was unraveling. He remained standing beside his velvet chair, shoulders stiff, jaw clenched. His expression was a mix of shock, denial, and the dawning horror that he had miscalculated on a level far beyond embarrassment. He tried to speak once, but only a strangled breath came out. He swallowed, furious at the crack forming in his confidence. "That," he began, pointing a trembling hand at Aaron, "that was nothing. A parlor trick. A lucky guess on the keys." No one seconded him, not a single nod or murmured agreement. The room had shifted. He was the only one still standing where he had been before the music started. The guests were looking at Aaron differently now. The lines in his face no longer looked like signs of decay. They looked like maps of experience. His worn jacket no longer looked like a disgrace. It looked like a history book stitched in fabric and thread. Even his boots seemed to carry a weight none of them had recognized before. As the silence deepened, Aaron lifted his head at last. He looked directly at Bradley, not with triumph, not with mockery, but with a calm, steady sadness. It was the look of a man who had seen far greater cruelty than this ballroom could ever conjure. The look of someone who had learned long ago that some people's hearts were simply barricaded by walls no music could reach. "Would you like another?" Aaron asked softly. There was no arrogance in the question. If anything, it felt like an offer of peace. But Bradley recoiled as if struck. "No," he snapped. You've had your little moment." His voice shook, betraying him. Someone in the crowd murmured, "Let him play," and then another voice joined in, firmer this time. "Yes, let him." A ripple of agreement followed. It was subtle but undeniable. For the first time since the gala began, the crowd wasn't following Bradley's lead. They were defying him. Bradley's face twisted with panic. He had spent years cultivating dominance in rooms like this, rooms where wealth determined authority, where power flowed toward him without question. But tonight, the current had shifted, and he felt it tugging against him like a riptide. Aaron's fingers rested lightly on the keys again, though he hadn't yet begun to play. "I'll choose something different," he said softly. Something honest. A low murmur of anticipation moved through the ballroom. Then, he began. This time, the first notes came quietly, gentler even than before. A faint, shimmering melody, fragile as breath on glass. But beneath that softness was something else. A weight, a history, a trembling ache that seeped into each note like ink blooming through paper. It wasn't classical. It wasn't something from a concert hall. It sounded like a lullaby warped into something sorrowful, a familiar comfort shaped into grief. Lily pressed a hand to her mouth as recognition stirred in her chest. She didn't know the song, not truly, but it felt like something her uncle might have hummed on the nights when he couldn't sleep. Something shaped in the shadows of barracks and battlefields. Aaron's eyes were closed again, but this time there was no sense of escape in his expression. Instead, he looked anchored, painfully anchored, by the memory behind the melody. The audience could feel it. The grief, the longing, the ghosts. With each passing measure, the song deepened. It became a story unfolding without words. A quiet night in a cold tent. A whispered promise between brothers, the soft cry of someone who knows dawn might not come for everyone. The room swayed with the music. A man who had earlier bet $100 that Aaron couldn't play a scale now stared openly, tears rolling down his cheeks. A woman who had laughed the loudest when Aaron asked to play clasped her hands tightly in front of her, trembling as though the music were peeling back a layer of her soul she had kept sealed away. Even the security guards, those towering men in black suits, had fallen utterly still. Their faces, usually impassive, were softened by something that looked dangerously close to reverence. Bradley, however, was spiraling. His breathing was uneven. His hands flexed uselessly at his sides. "Stop," he muttered. Then louder, "Stop! Stop playing!" But Aaron didn't stop, and no one asked him to, because the music was no longer a performance. It was a confession. It was the sound of loss and survival, the sound of promises kept long after hope had faded, the sound of a man who had lived through something the room couldn't imagine and had carried the weight of it alone for decades. The final notes drifted into a trembling silence. This silence was different from the one before. It wasn't stunned astonishment. It wasn't shame. It was grief, collective, raw, and shared by every person present. Lily wasn't the only one crying anymore. Dozens were. And Aaron Blake, ragged, forgotten, quietly extraordinary, lifted his hands from the keys as though laying a memory to rest. He turned. He stood. And for the first time since he stepped into the ballroom, he looked every inch the man he had once been. A soldier. A survivor. Someone who had carried something sacred out of a place where many left nothing at all. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady. "You asked if I was worth a meal," he said, his eyes fixed on Bradley. "I hope you found your answer." For a long moment, no one in the Grand Meridian ballroom dared to move. Aaron's question, soft, simple, devastating, hung in the air like smoke over a battlefield. Bradley Whitmore stood rigid, his face pale beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers. He looked as though someone had taken a chisel to the foundation of his identity and begun shattering it piece by piece. Around him, guests sat frozen in their seats, unable to tear their eyes from the man at the center of the storm. The silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was reverent, uncertain, laced with the tremor of realization. People were beginning to understand that this night was no longer about a gala, or donations, or social prestige. It had become something else entirely. And Aaron, standing straight now, no longer slumped or hesitant, radiated something that none of them had expected to witness, a quiet authority that felt older than the room itself. Bradley finally managed to find his voice, though it emerged thin and trembling. You think one song, one trick, changes anything? You don't belong here." He gestured wildly, as if the grandeur around them could swallow Aaron whole and restore order. But it was too late for that. Aaron didn't answer him right away. He looked out at the crowd instead, faces etched with shock, guilt, curiosity, even awe. His gaze was steady, unwavering, and when he finally spoke, it wasn't to Bradley. It was to everyone. "You've built a world inside this room," he said quietly. "A world where the only stories that matter are the ones written in bank accounts. But there are other stories, older ones, heavier ones." He stepped away from the piano, and every eye followed him as though pulled by an invisible thread. "I have seen men who had nothing left," he continued. "No home, no future, no hope. And they still shared the last bite of their meal. They still carried each other through mud and fire. They still sang in the dark because sometimes that was all they had." Lily felt her throat tighten. His words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that pressed against her bones. "Out there," Aaron said, nodding toward the night beyond the ballroom doors, "worth isn't something you wear. It isn't something you buy. It isn't something you inherit. Worth is what you give, and what you keep giving, even when there's nothing left." He paused for a moment, as if steadying old, invisible memories. "And that," he said softly, "is something some people in this room have forgotten." The room shifted, a collective flinch of realization. People who had earlier dismissed him couldn't meet his eyes now. Others looked ashamed, as if remembering moments when they themselves had failed to see the humanity of someone standing right in front of them. Only Bradley remained defiant, though his defiance was cracking like ice underfoot. "This is ridiculous," Bradley snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. "You're a nobody, a street drifter who wandered into the wrong place." Aaron's eyes moved to him with quiet precision. "That's what you saw," he said, "but that says more about you than it does about me." Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound came. It was as if the room itself refused to support him anymore. Then something subtle and devastating began to happen. People started to rise from their seats, not in panic, not in rebellion, but in recognition. It began with an elderly man near the front, his hands shaking slightly as he pushed himself upright. He had the posture of someone who had once stood at attention in a different kind of uniform. Then a woman stood, then another, then a pair of younger guests who exchanged a glance and rose together. Within seconds, half the ballroom was standing, not applauding, not speaking, just rising with the solemn, instinctive respect one gives to something sacred. Bradley looked around wildly, panic flooding his features. "Sit down!" he barked. "Everyone sit down!" No one did. The shift was irreversible now. Lily stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Sir," she said to Aaron, "that last song, what was it about?" Aaron looked at her gently. His expression softened for the first time that night. "A promise," he said quietly. "One I made a long time ago, to someone who didn't make it home." Lily's eyes burned, and she had to look away before she melted completely. A few guests covered their mouths in horror, realizing, too late, that their laughter earlier had been directed at a man carrying the weight of ghosts they could never comprehend. Aaron stepped closer to the edge of the stage. His posture had straightened fully now, shoulders squared, chin leveled. Not aggressive, but resolute. The air around him seemed to shift, as if the truth he carried radiated outward with every breath. "For years," he said, "I tried to live quietly, to disappear, to be nobody. It was easier than carrying the history of who I used to be." He paused. "But tonight I needed to remember, and I needed all of you to remember something too." Bradley swallowed hard. "Remember what?" he asked, though the question trembled. Aaron's eyes fixed on him with calm intensity. Eyes that had seen things Bradley's money and power could never shield him from. "That dignity," Aaron said, "is not measured by wealth." The simple sentence hit the room harder than any tirade could have. The elegance of it, its clarity, its undeniable truth, left several guests blinking back fresh tears. Bradley stepped back as if struck, his confidence shattered. Aaron turned away from him, letting the man's silence speak for itself. Instead, he addressed the room again. "I asked for a meal," he said. "But what I was really asking for was a measure of who you are." A murmur moved through the room. Shame, fear, realization, empathy, all crashing together like waves. "And now," Aaron said softly, "I've seen the answer." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were sharp and quiet, like the edge of a blade honed from years of experience. The ballroom held its breath. Because everyone in that room understood instinctively that the night had reached a turning point. Something had broken. Something had awakened. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would return to the way it had been before he walked in. The tension in the Grand Meridian ballroom had shifted into something almost unbearable, like a string pulled so tight it was moments away from snapping. Aaron Blake stood at the center of it, not dominating the room with force or volume, but with the sheer gravity of someone who had finally stopped hiding. His presence felt larger now, as though he occupied more space than his worn jacket and tired frame could allow. For the first time all evening, Bradley Whitmore looked genuinely afraid. Not afraid of Aaron physically, but afraid of what Aaron represented. Afraid of the truth that had been quietly gathering in the corners of the room, now creeping toward him like an oncoming tide he could no longer stop. "What do you want?" Bradley managed, his voice small despite his expensive suit, despite his power, despite everything he had built his life around. Aaron regarded him with a calm that made the question almost unnecessary. "What I want," he said softly, "is simple. I want honesty, accountability, humanity." He paused, watching Bradley with a gaze that felt ancient. "From you. From everyone." The guests remained standing, watching, waiting. Across the room, Lily wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, though the tears kept threatening to spill again. She had seen dignity tonight. Real dignity. Not the counterfeit kind that glittered on wrists or strutted across marble floors. It radiated from the old man in a way that humbled her, in a way that made her chest ache with something both painful and hopeful. Aaron stepped down from the stage, and the crowd instinctively parted for him. It wasn't out of fear. It was something closer to reverence. He walked slowly, measuredly, as though guiding the room through the final steps of a transformation none of them had expected when the night began. He stopped directly in front of Bradley. The contrast between them was staggering. Bradley in immaculate black tie attire, jaw tight, fists clenched in humiliation. Aaron in his frayed army jacket, standing tall with the quiet steadiness of a man who had faced far worse than ridicule. The room seemed to hold a collective breath. "You spoke earlier," Aaron said, "about earned worth, about success, about opportunity." His voice remained even, though there was a subtle edge now, a sharpness forged from long-buried experience. But real worth isn't measured at a gala, Bradley. It's measured in moments when no one else is watching. Bradley swallowed hard, You're trying to humiliate me. No, Aaron replied gently. Your choices tonight did that, not me. Bradley flinched. Aaron turned slightly, addressing the rest of the room as well. The truth is, I didn't come here for a confrontation. I came to see what kind of place this was, what kind of people were leading it, what kind of hearts were behind all the glitter. A murmur rippled across the crowd, an uneasy blend of guilt and realization. He continued, Some of you have kindness in you. I saw it. His eyes moved briefly to Lily, and she felt her breath catch. Others have forgotten it. He allowed the words to settle into the deepest corners of the ballroom. Then he faced Bradley again, his voice soft but absolute. You want to know what I want? Bradley's throat bobbed as he nodded. I want you to remember tonight, Aaron said. Every time you judge someone, every time you assume the story of a life you've never lived, I want you to remember that worth isn't a number, or a suit, or a table you sit at in a ballroom. Bradley's face crumpled, not fully, not into remorse, but into the first fragile crack in a wall he had spent his entire life fortifying. Aaron took a slow step back. And I want you, he added quietly, to step down. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Bradley's eyes widened. You can't make me. You're right, Aaron said gently. I can't, but everyone here tonight saw who you chose to be when you thought no one of consequence was watching. He let the silence sharpen around the words. Now they know, Aaron finished, and so do you. Bradley looked around the room desperately, as if begging for support, but found none. The faces staring back at him carried judgment, disappointment, or simple neutrality. The allies he'd always counted on were no longer willing to align themselves with him. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. After a long, defeated moment, he lowered his gaze. Aaron didn't wait for him to respond. He turned away and approached Lily instead. She straightened instinctively, nerves fluttering in her chest. She looked so small in her server's uniform, so vulnerable under the weight of the room's attention. But Aaron smiled softly, and something in her steadied. You saw me, he said to her, before anyone else did. You saw a person. Her eyes filled again. It was just the right thing to do. A lot of people forget the right thing, Aaron replied. You didn't. Hold on to that. Her breath shook as she nodded. Aaron placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture so warm, so human amid all the cold marble and gold, that several guests felt their hearts twist. You'll do good work, he told her, not as encouragement, but as a simple truth. I can feel it. When he stepped back, Lily watched him with a quiet awe she didn't yet have words for. Aaron faced the room again, and his voice carried a new softness now, lighter, but still firm. I didn't come here looking for pity. I came here hoping to see kindness. I found some, more than I expected. A few guests lowered their heads, humbled. The rest, he paused, letting silence carry the implication. The rest is up to you. He turned toward the massive archway, the same one where he had first appeared like an unwelcome specter, and began to walk toward it. His boots no longer left hesitant, dusty prints. His steps seemed steadier, more rooted, as if drawing strength from the very truth he had laid bare. The crowd parted for him a second time, this time willingly, gratefully. Lily watched him go with a swelling ache in her chest. She didn't want him to leave, not like this, not without something. Aaron, she called softly. He paused but didn't turn yet. Lily stepped forward. Where will you go? He considered the question. For a moment, his expression softened into something weary but strangely peaceful. Where I'm needed, he said finally. Then he looked back at the room, one last sweeping glance that seemed to pass through each person individually, weighing them gently, offering them a final chance to redeem themselves. Take care of your veterans, Aaron said quietly. They've carried more than you'll ever know. With that, he stepped through the archway, disappearing into the corridor beyond, into the quiet halls, the empty spaces, the world waiting outside. No applause followed him. Not because he didn't deserve it, but because applause felt far too small. What he left behind wasn't the echo of music or the sting of humiliation. It was truth, and truth has a way of lingering, settling into the cracks of the human heart and demanding change. In the ballroom, dozens of guests remained standing long after Aaron was gone. Lily wiped her cheeks again, though the tears refused to stop. Bradley stood alone, hollowed out by a reality he could no longer deny. And somewhere beyond the glittering doors, Aaron Blake walked into the night, unseen, uncelebrated, but carrying with him a quiet victory. He had walked into a world that once dismissed him. He had reminded it what humanity truly looks like, and he had left it changed. Forever.